They say the sea remembers everything, every whisper, every heartbreak, every goodbye. I've lived by the water for 25 years, and I've learned that the tide always brings something back. Even the things we try to let go. My name is Elena Ross, and I'm 50 years old. I live alone in a small house on the edge of a quiet coastal town. It's a place where mornings smell like salt and old wood, and evenings sound like the sea breathing. My house is old, my routine's older, tea at 6. Reading at 8, tending to my garden before noon. I used to think life ended long before death, that once love was gone, there was nothing left to wait for, that life has its own strange ways of proving us wrong. It was a windy afternoon in March when I first saw him, a young man sitting on the rocks near the shoreline, sketching something in a worn notebook. His hair was messy from the sea breeze, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, his jeans splattered with paint. He looked out of place, yet somehow exactly where he belonged. He came again the next day, and the next. Always alone, always lost in his art. By the third day, I found myself waiting for him, pretending to water my plants longer than I needed to, pretending not to notice him, pretending not to care. But I did. There was something about the way he looked at the ocean, as if he understood it. One morning, I was on the balcony when a voice called out from below, "Excuse me, ma'am, your book, it fell." I looked down and saw him, holding one of my novels that must have slipped through the railing the night before. "Oh, thank you," I said, a little embarrassed. He smiled, soft but bright. "You have great taste. To the lighthouse, right?" I laughed. "You've read Virginia Woolf?" He grinned. "My mom says that makes me an old soul." That was the first time I heard his name. Liam Carter. And though I didn't realize it then, that name would change the rhythm of my life forever. Liam started visiting often after that. Sometimes he'd return a book he'd borrowed. Sometimes he'd bring a new one for me. Sometimes he'd just sit by the garden wall and talk about painting, about his classes, about the sea. He told me he was 22, studying fine arts, spending the summer in town. He said he painted the ocean because it never looks the same twice. I told him I love the ocean because it never asks for anything. He smiled and said, "Maybe that's why it always comes back." That line stayed with me. One evening, a storm rolled in. The sky was gray and heavy, the kind of sky that feels alive. I saw him outside, trying to save his sketchbook from the wind. "Liam," I shouted, "get inside." He hesitated, then ran to my porch, drenched and laughing. I handed him a towel and a cup of tea. He sat near the fireplace, steam rising from his clothes. "You're not afraid of storms?" I asked. He shook his head. "Storms make me feel alive." "You'll learn," I said softly. "Calm is better." "Maybe," he whispered, "but calm can be lonely too." His words echoed inside me long after he left. After that night, something began to shift. He started painting near my porch more often. I started making an extra cup of tea, without admitting to myself why. And one day, he brought me a canvas. It was my house, the balcony, the sea, the light, all painted in colors I'd never seen. And in the corner of the balcony, he had painted a woman looking out toward the horizon. "That's you," he said. "You look like someone waiting for the world to start again." I wanted to tell him I wasn't waiting, that the world had already passed me by. But when I looked at him, I realized maybe it hadn't. That night, the ocean sounded different, like it was whispering something only I could understand. And for the first time in years, I whispered back, "There's something about youth that frightens people my age. It isn't the energy or the laughter or the recklessness. It's the reminder of what we've lost." Every time I saw Liam by the rocks with his sketchbook, it was like watching sunlight I could never touch again. And yet, I kept watching. He came almost every day now, sometimes with his paints, sometimes just to talk. He'd tell me about the city he came from, about his art professors, about how he wanted to paint the feeling of time passing. He said time isn't a clock, it's a tide. It pulls you forward even when you try to stand still. I didn't tell him that I had spent most of my life trying not to move at all. One morning, I was hanging laundry in the backyard when I heard him call out, "Good morning, Miss Elena." I turned, smiling despite myself. "I thought I told you to stop calling me that." He grinned, that same mischievous glint in his eyes. "What should I call you then?" "Elena will do." He nodded, then lifted a canvas from under his arm. "I brought something to show you." He set it against the wall, a painting of the sea at dawn with a single figure standing on the pier. I recognized the coat immediately. "It was mine. You painted me again," I said quietly. He shrugged, a little shy this time. "You always stand there in the mornings. I like the way you look at the ocean, like you're trying to remember something it took from you." I didn't know what to say, because he was right. That afternoon, we sat by the porch, watching the waves crash against the shore. He was sketching again, quick and fluid, while I pretended to read. "You know," he said suddenly, without looking up, "I think people are like coastlines." "How so?" I asked. "They change shape every time something touches them. Wind, water, love." He smiled faintly. "And sometimes they don't even realize it's happening." I felt something tighten inside me, an ache that was both new and familiar. The days began to fall into a quiet rhythm. He painted. I listened. He talked. I smiled. And without meaning to, I began to wait for him. I waited for his footsteps on the sand, for his laughter through the wind, for that lightness he carried everywhere he went. He brought color back into my life, not with grand gestures, but with simple, unspoken warmth. And still, I told myself it was nothing, just friendship, just kindness, just two souls sharing silence. Then came the day. He invited me to his studio, a small rented cabin near the lighthouse. It was cluttered with canvases, brushes, half-finished paintings, and light. So much light. "Welcome to the mess," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I looked around, amazed. "It's beautiful." He pointed toward one covered canvas in the corner. "That one's my favorite, but I haven't shown it to anyone yet. May I asked. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I lifted the cloth. It was me again, sitting by the sea, the light catching my face, my hair streaked with silver and gold. But it wasn't just a portrait. It was something else. He had painted me as I didn't even see myself, alive, strong, soft. Not a woman aging, but a woman still becoming. I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. "Why me?" He met my eyes. "Because you're real." And for a moment, time stopped. The sea outside was a dull hum. The light in the room turned golden, and all I could think was how long it had been since someone looked at me that way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way he said my name, softly as if it was something fragile. I stood by the window, listening to the tide, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the sound, because somewhere between his laughter and his silence, between his youth and my age, something impossible had begun to bloom, and I didn't know whether to run from it or to let it carry me away. I once believed silence was my greatest companion, but silence changes when someone begins to fill it. It becomes fragile, almost human. Since that day in Liam's studio, something had shifted between us. We still met by the sea, still talked about art and books and the color of waves, but the air carried something new, something trembling and unnamed. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me, not with curiosity, but with understanding. And that scared me more than anything else, because I knew what it felt like to be understood, and how easy it was to mistake that for love. One evening, We walked along the shoreline, our footprints side by side, fading as the tide crept in. He spoke first. "Do you ever think about what people would say?" I laughed softly. "People always have something to say, Liam." He nodded, staring out at the horizon. "I know, it's just, they'd never understand what this is. What is this?" I asked, my voice steadier than my heart. He stopped walking, turned to me, eyes bright with something raw. "It's connection, Elena. It's two people who found each other when they weren't supposed to." The waves crashed behind us, louder than before, as if the sea itself wanted to listen. I looked away. "You're 22. You have an entire life ahead of you." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but right now, you're my favorite part of it." I didn't know whether to be angry, grateful, or afraid, so I said nothing. And we walked the rest of the way in silence, our shadows tangled together in the fading light. Days passed, then weeks. We saw each other almost every day, always by the sea, always under the pretense of conversation. He'd talk about the future. I'd talk about the past. And somehow, between the two, we met in the present, in those small, stolen hours that belonged only to us. Sometimes when he'd laugh too hard, I'd forget the years between us, forget the way people would stare if they saw us, forget the rules life had written for me long ago. And sometimes I think he forgot too. One afternoon it started to rain. Not a storm, just that soft, steady kind of rain that makes the world feel cleaner. We took shelter under the old boat shed near the pier. He sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching the raindrops as they hit the water. I watched him quietly, the way his hands moved, gentle, focused, alive. He looked up suddenly. "Do you ever regret anything, Elena?" I hesitated. "I think regret is what happens when we remember too clearly." "And what do you remember too clearly?" I smiled faintly. "Everything." He put his pencil down. "You talk like you've already lived your whole life, haven't I?" He shook his head. "No, you're just in the middle of it. You just forgot how to start again." The rain grew heavier. I turned away, blinking fast, but the truth in his words hit harder than the sound of the storm. Because maybe he was right, Dad. Maybe I wasn't at the end of my story. Maybe I'd just been waiting for someone to remind me there was still more to write. The next morning, he came to my door, drenched, barefoot, holding a small seashell in his hand. "Found this for you," he said. It sounded like your laugh. I laughed and really laughed, and he joined in. We stood there, two people laughing at nothing, soaked and foolish, and for the first time in years, I didn't care who saw. That's when I knew something had already happened between us. Not through touch, not through confession, but through every quiet moment that had built this impossible, beautiful thing, a connection that didn't ask for permission, a love that didn't need to be named. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The sea was wild, the wind restless, and my thoughts louder than the waves. I walked out to the porch, barefoot, the cold wood beneath my feet grounding me. And there he was, standing on the sand, looking up at my balcony. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to, because sometimes love doesn't arrive in words. It arrives in silence, and the kind that feels like home. In a small town, nothing truly stays secret, not even silence. It has a way of echoing through windows, over fences, carried on the wind until it becomes someone else's story. Ours was no different. At first, it was harmless. A glance from a neighbor when Liam's laughter drifted through my open porch. A curious look from the grocer when we walked together, both holding coffee cups. Just small passing things, the kind of things you pretend not to notice, but whispers are like tides. They begin softly, and before you realize it, they're everywhere. One morning, I was at the bakery when I overheard two women talking near the counter. That painter boy, the young one. He's been spending an awful lot of time at Elena Ross's place. Maybe she's helping him with something. A pause. A smirk. Helping him with what, exactly? Their laughter was quiet, but it burned through me like salt on an open wound. I left the bread on the counter and walked out before they could see my face. Outside, the sea wind felt colder than usual. When Liam came by later, I tried to hide the storm in my voice. "People are talking," I said, keeping my back to him as I wiped the same spot on the table over and over. He was silent for a moment, then softly, "Let them." I turned. "It's not that simple." He stepped closer. "It could be." I shook my head. "You don't understand, Liam. You'll leave this town, you'll move on. I'll still be here, surrounded by their words." He looked at me with that same steady calm that always undid me. "Elena, I don't care what they say." "You care because you've lived your whole life listening to other people's rules?" "I haven't." That stung, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. After that day, I began to pull away. Subtly, at first, I stopped inviting him for tea. I spent more time inside, curtains drawn. When I did see him by the sea, I'd wave, but from a distance, I told myself it was for his sake, that I was protecting him from the weight of a scandal that could ruin him before his life even began. But deep down, I knew I was protecting myself from the ache of wanting something I wasn't supposed to have. Then one evening, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, he was standing there, rain dripping from his hair, eyes sharp with hurt. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "I'm not doing anything." "You're pretending we're strangers again." I looked down. "Maybe that's what we should have been all along." He exhaled, long and shaky. "You think this is just about age?" "It's not just that," I said. "It's everything. You and I live in different worlds, Liam." He stepped closer. "No, Lena, we live under the same sky. You just stopped looking up." The room fell silent, except for the sound of the storm outside. He stood there for a moment, searching my face for something I couldn't give. Then he whispered, "You once told me the ocean never asks for anything, but maybe it was waiting for someone who finally would." And then he left. The door closed, but his words stayed, echoing in the corners of my house, in the rhythm of the rain, in the slow beat of my heart. For days I didn't see him. His easel was gone from the beach, his cabin near the lighthouse dark. The silence he left behind was heavier than the whispers ever were. I thought distance would bring peace. Instead, it brought a different kind of ache, the kind that doesn't fade, just changes shape. And every night, I found myself standing by the window, staring at the sea, waiting for something I no longer believed would return. For days, I avoided the places where he used to be. The shoreline, the garden wall, the lighthouse trail, all of them, haunted by a silence that didn't belong to me. You never realize how much someone fills a space until their absence changes the sound of it. My house felt too large. My tea too cold. Even the sea, once my truest companion, had turned indifferent. It was as if the world had gone back to its old rhythm, and I no longer fit inside it. I kept telling myself that I'd done the right thing, that this distance was necessary, noble, even. But every time I tried to believe it, something inside me whispered otherwise, because the truth, the one I'd been too afraid to say aloud, was that I missed him. Not the laughter, not the company, not even the conversation. I missed the way he made me feel alive again, and I hated myself for it, not because of the age, or the whispers, or the stares I imagined behind curtains, but because I had lived 50 years of my life believing that love had an expiration date, and he made me realize it. DIDN, single quotes T. One afternoon, I walked to the pier where the gulls circled above the water and the horizon looked endless. The air smelled of salt and memory. I sat on the same bench where I had first seen him sketching. The wood was damp beneath my palms. and the wind carried the faintest echo of his voice. Dot, it was there that I began to write again, not in letters to him. I couldn't bear that, but in a small, weathered journal I'd left untouched for years. I wrote about the tide, the light, the laughter I pretended not to miss. I wrote about fear and how sometimes love and fear wear the same face. And then, without meaning to, I wrote his name, Liam Carter. And suddenly, it felt like breathing again. Later that week, I visited the art fair in town, something I hadn't done in years. I told myself it was just to pass the time. But when I saw his name on one of the display cards, Liam Carter, Shoreline Series, my heart stumbled. Dot, his paintings were everywhere. The sea in all its moods, soft dawns, violent storms, golden afternoons. And then, in the center, one that stopped me cold. Dot, it was called The Distance Between Ages. Two figures stood on opposite sides of the shoreline, one young, one older, the tide between them alive with color, light, and longing. I felt something break quietly inside me, not in pain, but in recognition. He hadn't painted loss. He had painted connection, fragile, yes, but real. And I realized then that love, at any age, isn't defined by what the world allows. It's defined by what we're brave enough to feel. That night, back home, I sat by the window again, the sea calm, the moon gentle. And for the first time in months, I spoke aloud. Liam, I whispered, as if the ocean might carry it to him. I was wrong. I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting myself. The tide rolled in, brushing against the shore like an answer. And I knew, somewhere out there, he could feel it too, because some bonds don't break. They just wait for courage to return. The first time it rained, he came to me with laughter. The second time, he came with silence. Dot, it was mid-September when the storm rolled back over the coast. Heavy clouds dragging the sky into darkness, wind bending the trees until they groaned. I hadn't seen Liam in almost 2 months. His absence had become a habit. I wore like an old coat, uncomfortable, but familiar. That night, I was sitting by the fire when the lights flickered and went out. The room was swallowed by the sound of rain, the kind that feels endless, and then through the downpour. I knocked at it first. I thought I imagined it. But it came again, sharp, desperate, real. I opened the door, and there he was. He stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, his eyes searching mine like he was afraid I might vanish. For a second, neither of us spoke. Dot, then he exhaled, trembling. You always did leave the light on, Liam. I whispered, the sound of his name breaking something inside me. What are you doing here? I came to say goodbye, he said. Dot, the world outside cracked with thunder. He stepped inside before it could stop him, water dripping onto the floorboards. His hands were cold, his breath uneven. I got accepted, he said. The art residency I told you about? I leave for Florence tomorrow. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The fire popped, the rain grew louder. That's wonderful, I finally said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'm proud of you. He looked at me, really looked. Don't do that, Elena. Don't turn it into something simple. It is simple, I said softly. You're young, talented. I deserve honesty. He cut in. Dot, my heart stumbled. What do you mean? He took a step closer. I mean, I deserve to know if what I felt was only mine. The words hung in the air between us, sharp, impossible, and heavy with truth. I turned away, staring into the fire. Liam, please. He moved closer still. I could feel the warmth of him, the way the air seemed to hum around his voice. Tell me you didn't feel it too, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. This isn't about feeling. It's about everything else. He smiled sadly. Everything else never mattered until you told me it did. And then he reached out. His fingers brushed mine, hesitant at first, like a question. Dot, it wasn't passion. It wasn't hunger. It was recognition. The kind that says, I know you. I see you. I choose you anyway. The thunder rolled again, closer this time. The storm outside had become a mirror of everything I'd kept locked away. I took a step back, trembling. Liam, if you stay here another minute, I'll forget how to let you go. He stared at me, rainwater still glistening on his skin, his eyes dark with everything we hadn't said. Then don't. And in that moment, something inside me, the fear, the guilt, the quiet shame finally broke. I don't remember who moved first. Only the sound of the rain as it poured harder, the crash of waves beyond the cliffs, the warmth of his hand against my face. When our lips met, it wasn't a promise. It was forgiveness for all the years I'd spent believing love had passed me by. Later, we sat by the window, the storm softening to a whisper. He held my hand, tracing the lines on my skin as if they were the map of everything we'd survived. I thought you'd forgotten me, he said. I tried, I whispered. But the sea kept bringing you back. He smiled, tired, quiet, real. I'll come back, Elena, when I do. Maybe we don't have to hide anymore. I wanted to believe him. But love has always been a tide. It pulls you close only to test how far you'll go when it leaves. Still, I said the only thing that felt true. I'll be here. When he left that night, the rain began to fade. And for the first time since I met him, the world felt still. I stood by the door long after he was gone, watching the road disappear into mist. And though my heart ached, it wasn't with loss. It was with something softer, purer. Hope. There's a kind of silence that only comes after storms, the kind that feels too big for words. It's been 6 months since Liam left. 6 months since that rain-soaked night when love came crashing through my door like thunder and left just as suddenly, leaving the scent of salt and smoke behind. Since then, the world has gone still. The sea outside my window no longer roars. It hums, a low, endless breath, as if it's tired of holding secrets. I walk the same path every morning, down to the cliffs, through the dunes, past the small wooden pier where fishermen still pretend not to notice me. They call me the woman who waits. They think I don't hear them, but I do, and maybe they're right, because I am waiting. Not for him exactly, but for the version of myself I was when he was here, the one who laughed without permission, who danced barefoot on the sand at midnight, who dared to love even when the world called it wrong. Every few weeks, a letter comes. Florence, Paris, Vienna, postcards painted in his colors, brush strokes of cathedrals, narrow streets, rain falling on stone. He never writes much, just fragments, as if afraid too many words would pull him back to me. Found a cafe that smells like your kitchen. The sea here looks smaller. I hope you're painting again. I never reply. Not because I don't want to, but because every word I'd write would sound like, come home. Winter came early this year. The waves turned violent again, slamming against the rocks as if to remind me what love costs. One painted through most of December, canvases full of gray horizons and half-finished faces. But one painting stayed. It was the one I started the morning after he left. A storm. 2 figures standing at the edge of the sea, one reaching, one turning away. It took me months to realize they were both me. One night, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Elena? His voice. Faint, older somehow, as though distance had taught it to whisper. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Liam, I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have called. The sound of rain filled the silence between us. Always rain. Where are you? I asked. Lisbon, he said. It's beautiful here, but it doesn't feel like home. I closed my eyes. Home isn't always a place. He laughed softly, the same kind of laugh that used to break me. I know, it's a person. My throat tightened. Then why did you leave? He hesitated. Because I needed to know if I loved you because of the sea, or despite it. And I whispered, and I still don't know, he said. But every painting I make looks like your house. The line went quiet. Then the soft click of goodbye. That night, I sat by the window until dawn, watching the first light spread over the horizon. For the first time in months, I didn't cry, because something in his voice, weary, human, unfinished, told me this wasn't the end. Just the silence between waves. Weeks passed. The town thawed into spring. The fishermen waved now. The world began to move again, but I stayed by the shore, waiting, not for him to return, but for the tide to shift. For the silence to mean something other than loss, sometimes. I think love isn't about possession at all. It's about recognition. And when you truly see someone, it changes how you see the world, even after they've gone. And then one morning, as the sun rose over the sea, a letter arrived. No postcard this time, no stamp. Just my name, Elena Ross, written in his familiar, uneven hand. Inside was a single sentence, I'm coming home. The tide began to move again. The morning his letter came, the sea was calm, unnaturally calm, as if even the waves were holding their breath. I read his words 100 times. Just 4 of them, I'm coming home. No date, no reason. Just that quiet certainty that cracked open the stillness I'd built around myself. For days, I tried to convince myself it meant nothing, that he was only passing through, that maybe home didn't mean me. But every time the wind shifted or a gull cried out over the cliffs, I felt it, something moving closer to us. It happened one evening. The sun was sinking low, painting the shore in gold. I was hanging sheets to dry when I heard footsteps on the gravel road. When I turned, he was standing there, same boyish smile, same quiet eyes, but older somehow. The world had touched him, soft his edges, and deepened his silence. He didn't speak at first. Neither did I. We just stood there, 2 people trying to bridge a distance made of time. Then, finally he said it, not as an apology, not as a plea, but as truth. I never stopped seeing you in everything. I wanted to be angry, to remind him of the months I spent waiting, the nights I watched the horizon and hated myself for hoping. But when I looked at him, I saw the same boy who had once painted sunsets for me in silence, and I couldn't hate that dot. We went inside. The same house, the same scent of salt and lavender. Everything untouched, yet nothing the same. He ran his fingers along the bookshelves, the paint-stained table, the cracked window frame. You didn't change anything, he said. I was afraid if I did. I whispered, you wouldn't find your way back. He looked at me then, long and deep, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. That night, we talked for hours. About Florence, about the people he met, the exhibitions, the noise of the world. And then about silence. About me, he told me he'd written hundreds of letters, pages and pages of thoughts, confessions, half-dreams. But he never sent them. I wanted to, he said, but every time I sealed one, I realized the person I was writing to didn't exist anymore. You were changing, even from here. I smiled faintly. So were you. He nodded. Maybe that's why I had to come back, not to find what we were, but to see who we became. Later, he pulled something from his bag, a small, worn sketchbook. He opened it, and I saw us. Every page. My hands, my house, the waves, the cliffs, drawn again and again, as if repetition could summon me across oceans. I tried to stop, he said quietly, but the world without you didn't make sense. My breath caught. I traced one of the sketches, the one of me painting by the window, and whispered, you were never meant to stop. We didn't speak after that. We just sat there, the night humming with old warmth and new beginnings. The lamp flickered softly, and the sea whispered outside like a lullaby that finally made sense. There was no grand confession, no cinematic kiss this time, only peace. The kind that comes when two people finally forgive themselves. Before he left that night, he paused at the door. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. I smiled. "I know." And when he walked away, I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't waiting anymore. He didn't need to return for me to feel whole. He already had. Weeks passed again, this time softer. We fell into a rhythm, shared dinners, long walks, quiet mornings. It wasn't the wild, aching love we once had. It was gentler, real dot and one evening. As we watched the tide roll and beneath a pale pink sky, he turned to me and said, "Elena, what if we stop pretending time matters?" I laughed. "And what would we do instead?" He smiled. "Whatever we still can." And when he reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. Because for the first time in years, the tide and my heart were moving in the same direction. When you've lived long enough beside the sea, you learn that waves always return, not the same, not unchanged, but faithful in their rhythm. It was late summer when Liam asked me to marry him. No kneeling, no ring, no rehearsed words. We were walking barefoot along the shore, the tide brushing our ankles, when he simply said, "Elena, I don't want to remember you as someone I once loved. I want to grow old remembering you every day." I stopped walking. The wind lifted my hair, and the sunlight turned his eyes to gold. He smiled, soft and uncertain. "Will you?" And I, after a lifetime of silence, of fear, of believing love had an expiration date, finally found my answer. Yes. It was the easiest word I had ever said. The town didn't know what to make of it. A woman of 50 marrying a man barely past his 20s. Whispers drifted through cafes and church pews like wind through hollow shells. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care. Because love, real love, doesn't belong to a decade or a rule. It belongs to the souls that find each other, even if the world can't understand. How did we choose the same beach where we first met? The place where he once sketched the sea as I painted it. The morning of the wedding, mist rolled across the cliffs. Wrapping everything in a dreamlike haze, I wore a pale ivory dress, simple, unpretentious, with a thin ribbon of blue along the hem that reminded me of the horizon. He wore a linen shirt and sand-colored trousers, his sleeves rolled, his hair tousled by wind. No orchestra, no crowd, just a handful of faces, people who had learned that love, in its purest form, doesn't need permission. And as the officiant spoke, the waves rose higher, almost as if the sea itself was blessing us. When it was time to speak our vows, Liam looked at me, eyes full of quiet conviction. "Elena Ross," he said softly, "you once told me love was like the tide. It leaves, but it always finds its way back. I've spent years trying to prove you wrong, but every path, every painting, every dream led me here. To you. And now I don't care where the tide goes because you are my shore." The tears came before I could stop them. He smiled, brushing one away with his thumb. I took a breath and answered, "Liam Carter, you were the boy who reminded me that life doesn't end when we grow older. Sometimes it begins again in a different form. You taught me to stop counting years and start counting moments. And if the world ever doubts us, I'll remind it that love never needed its approval." The officiant's voice trembled slightly as he spoke the final words. And when Liam leaned forward to kiss me, the world fell silent, except for the sea. The sound of the waves became our music. After the ceremony, we stayed by the water long after everyone left. The sun dipped low, painting the world in golden rose. He held me close as the tide crept over our feet. "You know," he whispered, "if someone told me years ago I'd marry the woman who taught me to see the sea differently, I wouldn't have believed them." I smiled. "And if someone told me I'd fall in love again at 50, I'd have called them mad." He laughed, that soft, familiar sound I'd waited years to hear again, and kissed my forehead. The world, for once, didn't judge. It just listened. That night, as we walked home, the moonlight glowed across the ocean's surface like spilled silver. The house looked warmer than ever. Our paintings still hung along the walls, side by side. I paused at the door and looked back at the sea one last time. It was calm, peaceful, as if it had been waiting for this moment too. People say love stories fade after the vows. Maybe they do for some, but for us, it didn't fade. It transformed from fire to warmth, from longing to belonging, from searching to stillness. Years later, I still wake to the sound of the tide, and every morning, he brings me coffee with paint on his fingers and sunlight on his face. We don't speak much. We don't need to, because love, once found in chaos, now lives in quiet. And sometimes, when the waves are especially loud, I close my eyes and remember the girl I was, and the boy who saw her when no one else did. The sea hums below the cliffs, forever patient, forever watching. And in its rhythm, I still hear our vows. They say the sea never stops speaking, only that most people forget how to listen. It's been 12 years since that morning on the beach when I said yes. 12 years of tides, of laughter, of quiet mornings, and long, golden evenings. Liam still paints. He says he can't capture the sea the way it really looks, that it keeps changing faster than his brush can follow. I tell him that's the point. Some things aren't meant to be captured. Only love. Our house has grown older with us. The walls have softened, the windows creak, and the garden now spills wild with jasmine and seagrass. But it's beautiful in its imperfection. Like us. There are days when I sit by the same window I once waited beside and watched the waves roll in. The same view, the same rhythm, and yet every time it feels new. Sometimes Liam sits beside me sketching. Sometimes he falls asleep with a pencil still in his hand. And I smile because that's what love looks like now, not grand, not loud, but steady. A few weeks ago, he painted me again, older, wrinkled, hair turned silver by years of salt and sunlight. When I saw the portrait, I laughed. "You made me look too calm," I said. He smiled, brushing paint from his fingers. "You were calm," he said. "You're the sea after the storm." I didn't answer. I just looked at him, this man who once walked into my life with rain in his eyes and a heart full of impossible dreams, and realized how right he was, because peace isn't the absence of pain. It's learning to live with its echoes. Every year, on the anniversary of our wedding, we return to the same spot on the shore. We don't bring flowers or music or company, just us and the sea. He always brings his old sketchbook, the one filled with the first drawings of me. Most of the pages have faded, saltwater having kissed the corners pale. But on one page, the first page, his handwriting still lingers, beneath a rough sketch of the tide, for the woman who made the world sound like waves. I never told him, but that one line is the only thing I'd save if the house ever burned. Sometimes, when the sky turns orange and the horizon blurs, I think about the years before him, the solitude, the quiet ache, the night spent talking to the sea as if it could answer. And I realize maybe it did. Maybe the sea sent him. Liam says he'll live to be 100, but I know time doesn't listen to promises. Still, I don't fear it anymore. Because even when time takes, love remains, and brushstrokes and laughter, and the echo of footsteps on wet sand. And when my time comes, I hope he'll still walk the shore. And I hope when he looks out over the water, he'll hear it, the same soft hum I hear now, the sound of the tide, the sound of everything that ever was.